I remember the ocean more than anything else because it was loud and endless and honest, and that is what hurts the most, because while the waves kept crashing against the shore with a rhythm that never lied, my husband was already learning how to lie to my face, and I did not know it yet. I was standing on the balcony of our honeymoon suite with the salty wind tangling my hair and my white dress flowing behind me like some cheap version of a fairy tale bride, believing that I had married my soulmate, believing that the man inside that room unpacking our luggage was the same boy who once promised me forever under a sky full of trembling stars. And I smiled when he wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, pressing a kiss against my cheek, telling me how lucky he was, and I believed him because love makes you blind in the most beautiful and dangerous way. And when my best friend messaged me that evening asking for pictures of the view and teasing me about how I must be glowing, I laughed and sent her a voice note telling her how perfect everything felt, not knowing that she would soon become the shadow in my marriage, the silent echo in every argument, the name I would taste like poison in my mouth. The first night should have been unforgettable in the way movies promise it to be, soft and sacred and full of whispered confessions, but instead there was something strange, something I ignored because happiness can be fragile, and I was terrified of breaking it. He kept checking his phone saying it was just work, saying his manager needed something urgent, and I nodded like the understanding wife I wanted to be, and when I reached for him he held me, but his mind felt elsewhere, like he was present in body and absent in soul. And I told myself I was overthinking because this was our honeymoon, this was supposed to be perfect, and perfection does not allow doubt to exist. So I buried it deep inside my chest and kissed him harder, as if passion could erase suspicion. The next morning I woke up alone in bed, the sheets cold beside me and the sound of the shower running in the bathroom, and I smiled thinking he was planning some sweet surprise. But when I stepped into the living area I saw his phone on the table lighting up with a message, and I swear I did not mean to look. I swear I trusted him completely, but the name on the screen froze my heartbeat because it was her name, my best friend, the girl who knew every secret I ever had, the girl who held my hand when I cried before the wedding, telling me how lucky I was. And the message preview was short but sharp like a knife: I miss you already. And for a moment I could not breathe, because that is not something you send to a married man on his honeymoon. And I stood there shaking, telling myself there must be an explanation. Maybe it was a joke, maybe it was nothing, maybe I was being dramatic, but deep down a quiet voice began to whisper that something was wrong, terribly wrong. I did not confront him that day. Instead I acted normal. I smiled at breakfast. I held his hand while we walked along the beach. I let him take pictures of me under the golden sunset, and every time his phone buzzed he would turn it upside down as if protecting it from the world. And I noticed it now. I noticed the way he would step away to answer calls, the way his laughter sounded forced, the way he avoided eye contact when I mentioned her name casually in conversation. And the more I watched the clearer the cracks became, because love may be blind but betrayal has a smell, and I could sense it in the air between us, thick and suffocating. That evening while he slept exhausted from a long day of pretending, I finally did something I never thought I would do. I picked up his phone and my hands were trembling so badly I could barely type the passcode, but I knew it because it was my birthday. The numbers he once said were the most important date of his life, and the irony made me feel sick because when the screen opened it did not reveal one message, it revealed dozens, hundreds, stretching back weeks, months, even before our wedding, and each one felt like a slap across my face. Their words were intimate, playful, desperate, full of longing and hidden meetings and stolen kisses and plans to see each other again, and I kept scrolling, unable to stop even though every line shattered another piece of my heart. And then I found pictures taken in secret of them together, smiling too close, touching too comfortably, and in that moment the ocean outside our window felt like it was roaring inside my chest, drowning me in a truth I was not ready to accept. I do not know how long I sat there staring at that glowing screen, but when he moved in his sleep I quickly locked it and placed it back exactly where it was, and I crawled into bed beside him, staring at the ceiling all night because the man breathing softly next to me was no longer my safe place. He was a stranger wearing the face of someone I loved, and the betrayal was not just his, it was hers too. The girl who knew my fears about losing him, the girl who adjusted my veil on my wedding day, the girl who hugged me tighter than anyone else and whispered that she would always protect my happiness. And I realized that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones capable of the deepest wounds. Morning came too soon, and with it the performance began again. He kissed my forehead, asked if I slept well, and I forced a smile that felt like broken glass against my lips because I was not ready to explode. Not yet. I needed to understand how long, how deep, how serious this was. I needed to know if I was fighting for a marriage that had already died before it began. And as we prepared to go out for another romantic day in paradise, I looked at him carefully, memorizing every detail of his face, wondering how someone could look so gentle and still be capable of such cruelty. And I made a silent promise to myself that before this honeymoon ended I would confront the truth head on, even if it destroyed me, because living in a beautiful lie is far worse than surviving an ugly truth. And as we stepped out into the sunlight with the ocean sparkling behind us and tourists laughing around us, I realized that my honeymoon had turned into an investigation, my love story into a nightmare, and the two people I trusted most in this world were now connected by secrets that could ruin everything, and I did not know yet that the worst was still waiting for me, just one message away from being discovered. I stopped believing in coincidences the moment I saw her name flash across his screen again while we were sitting side by side at dinner with candles flickering between us and the ocean stretching endlessly behind him like a witness that refused to look away, and he smiled at me while his phone vibrated against the table as if nothing inside it could destroy me, and I watched him silence the notification without opening it and slide the device into his pocket with a calmness that felt rehearsed, and that was the exact second I understood that this was not a mistake, this was not confusion, this was something ongoing, something alive, something breathing between them even while I sat across from him wearing the ring he had placed on my finger just days ago. I remember asking him softly if everything was okay at work, and he nodded too quickly saying yes, of course, why would you ask, and I shrugged pretending it was nothing, but inside my chest my heart was pounding so loudly I thought he could hear it, and I wondered how long he had been lying to me with that same gentle voice, how many times he had kissed me after texting her, how many times she had listened to me cry about wedding stress while secretly planning moments with my husband, and the thought made my stomach twist, because betrayal from one person hurts, but betrayal from two people who know you inside out feels like being erased from your own story. That night I could not pretend anymore, and when he stepped onto the balcony to take another private call, I followed him quietly, standing just close enough to hear the softness in his tone, the tenderness he no longer used with me, and I did not need to hear her words to know it was her, because his voice changed, it became lighter, younger, almost excited, and when he said I miss you too, I felt something inside me snap silently like a thread pulled too tight, and I stepped forward before I could stop myself, and he turned around startled, his eyes widening when he saw me standing there, and for a moment none of us spoke, not him, not me, not even the ocean, because silence can be louder than screams. I asked him who he was talking to, and he hesitated just for a second, but that second was enough, because truth does not pause like that, and then he said it was just a friend, and I laughed, a hollow sound that did not feel like mine, and I told him to put the phone on speaker, and he refused, saying I was overreacting, saying I was tired, saying this honeymoon was supposed to be special, and the irony of those words burned through me, because special was the last thing this felt like, and when I said her name directly his face changed, not in anger, not in denial, but in something worse, guilt, and that expression confirmed everything before he even opened his mouth. He tried to explain in broken sentences, saying it started before the wedding, saying it was confusion, saying he loved me but also felt something he could not control, and I remember staring at him thinking how strange it was that the man I loved could stand there confessing emotional and physical betrayal while still expecting me to understand, as if my heart was something flexible, something that could stretch around their affair and make room for it. And when I asked him how long, he looked down and whispered months, and that word echoed inside me, because months meant during our engagement, months meant while I was choosing my dress, months meant while she was helping me write my vows. I felt tears burning my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, because crying in front of him felt like giving him power, and instead I asked the question that terrified me the most. I asked if it was still happening, and he did not answer immediately, and that silence was the loudest confirmation of all, and I realized then that even on this honeymoon, even in this room, even in this moment, he was still connected to her, still choosing her in small secret ways, and something cold settled inside me, replacing the warmth I once felt when he touched me. We argued until our voices grew hoarse, until the walls of that beautiful suite felt like they were closing in on us, and he kept saying he was confused, kept saying he needed time, kept saying he did not want to lose me but also did not want to hurt her, and hearing him speak about her feelings while mine were shattering in front of him felt like another betrayal layered on top of the first. And I asked him if he loved her, and he said he did not know, and I almost wished he had said yes, because uncertainty is crueler than truth. Later that night, when he finally fell asleep on the couch leaving me alone in the bedroom, I picked up my phone and opened her chat window. My best friend, my sister by choice, the girl who knew my childhood traumas and my dreams of building a family, and I typed her name again and again, unable to believe this was real, and I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to ask how she could look into my eyes on my wedding day and smile, but instead I sent a simple message asking if she was awake, and when she replied instantly saying yes, always for you, I felt something inside me break beyond repair, because she was lying so effortlessly, and I wondered if she felt even a fraction of the guilt that was crushing me. I did not confront her yet, because I needed clarity, I needed proof, I needed to see how far this went, and as I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of waves, I understood that my honeymoon had turned into a battlefield, my marriage into a triangle of secrets, and I was the only one who had not agreed to play this game. And for the first time since the wedding, I allowed myself to imagine walking away, not because I did not love him, but because loving someone who divides his heart can slowly destroy yours. And I realized that by the time this trip ended, I would have to choose between fighting for a man who betrayed me or choosing myself, myself. For the first time in my life, the last morning of our honeymoon arrived with a strange kind of silence, the kind that settles after a storm has already destroyed everything, and I woke up before him, staring at the ceiling of that once beautiful room, realizing that I was no longer the woman who had walked into it days ago with hope in her heart and trust in her eyes, because something inside me had shifted permanently, and I knew that whatever happened next would define the rest of my life, either as a woman who tolerated betrayal or as a woman who refused to be second choice in her own marriage. He was still asleep on the couch where he had chosen to stay after our argument, and for a moment I studied his face, remembering the way I used to look at him with admiration, remembering how safe I once felt in his arms, and I asked myself whether love alone was enough to survive this kind of wound, because love without respect becomes humiliation, and love without loyalty becomes self-destruction, and I finally understood that I could not beg for something that should have been given freely. I picked up my phone and opened my chat with her again, reading through years of memories, photos from birthdays, late-night confessions, secrets about crushes, dreams about weddings, and I wondered at which point she stopped being my safe place and started becoming my rival, and I realized that betrayal rarely begins with hatred, it begins with boundaries that slowly disappear until loyalty becomes optional and desire becomes stronger than friendship, and the thought made me feel both furious and strangely calm, because clarity brings a cold strength with it. Instead of sending another emotional message, I called her directly, and when she answered, her voice sounded normal, almost cheerful, asking how the honeymoon was going, and I did not scream, I did not cry, I simply told her that I knew everything, and the silence that followed was heavier than any insult, because guilt speaks loudly when words fail, and after a few seconds she tried to defend herself, saying it was complicated, saying it just happened, saying they never meant to hurt me, and I listened quietly, because excuses lose their power when you no longer need explanations, and I asked her one final question. I asked if she loved him, and she whispered yes, and that single word sealed the end of something that had taken a lifetime to build. When I ended the call, I did not feel the dramatic collapse I had expected. Instead, I felt an unexpected stillness, as if my heart had accepted what my mind had been fighting, and I walked to the balcony, watching the ocean one last time, understanding that waves do not beg the shore to stay, they crash, they retreat, they return stronger, and in that moment I decided that I would not fight for someone who was unsure about me. When he woke up, I asked him to sit with me, and there was no anger left in my tone, only exhaustion, and I told him I had spoken to her, and I saw fear flash across his face, because secrets lose their thrill when exposed, and I told him he did not have to choose anymore, because I was making the choice for him, and he tried to interrupt, tried to promise change, tried to swear that he loved me more, but I stopped him, because love that requires competition is not love, it is insecurity, and I told him that if his heart was divided, then he was not ready to be a husband, and I refused to spend my life fighting for half of someone. He cried then, something I had never seen before, and part of me wanted to comfort him, because habits of love do not disappear overnight, but I stayed firm, because I finally understood that staying would teach him that my pain was negotiable, and leaving would teach him that my worth was not, and I removed my ring, slowly feeling the weight of it in my palm, and placed it on the table between us, not as revenge, not as drama, but as closure, and I told him that the woman he married deserved honesty from the beginning, and since he could not give it, I would give myself freedom instead. The flight home was quiet and separate, and although we sat in the same row, there was an invisible wall between us, built from lies and broken trust, and when we landed, I did not go to the apartment we had prepared together. I went to my parents' house, and for the first time since the wedding I allowed myself to cry fully without holding back, because strength does not mean absence of pain, it means choosing dignity despite it. In the weeks that followed, the truth spread, families got involved, apologies were made, promises were offered, but something inside me had already decided, and I filed for separation, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. And as for her, she tried to reach out many times, but some betrayals do not deserve reconciliation, and I learned that losing a husband and a best friend at the same time feels like the end of the world, but sometimes the end of one world is the beginning of another. Months later, when I finally stood alone by another shoreline watching a different sunset, I realized that the honeymoon had not been the end of my love story, it had been the beginning of my self-respect, and although the memory still hurt, it no longer controlled me, because I had chosen myself over betrayal, and in doing so I discovered a strength I never knew I had, and that is how my marriage ended, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a quiet decision to never accept less than loyalty again. And even though they broke my heart, they also freed me from a life built on lies, and sometimes that freedom is the greatest love story of all.